invited him to sleep at the White House, is now calling for him to be impeached and replaced by Vice President J.D. Vance. The man who was handed nearly unfettered access to the federal government is openly musing about forming his own political party. What at this time yesterday was a one-sided attack on the president's signature spending bill is no longer just a policy disagreement, not even close. It has now become quite personal, as the president says he thinks he knows why.
It's about 1.6 trillion in cuts. Elon's upset because we took the EV mandate, and which was a lot of money for electric vehicles.
Good evening. This is Nathan Cross with American Daily News, and if you weren't paying attention on December 14th, you missed one of the most dramatic moments we have seen on Capitol Hill in years. We are talking about Representative Al Green from Texas, a Democrat who has been pushing for impeachment since Trump's first term, standing on the House floor and delivering what can only be described as a scorching indictment of this president that left Republicans scrambling and Democrats on their feet. Green looked directly into the cameras and declared that we are now in a countdown to impeachment, and he laid out in devastating detail exactly why he believes Donald Trump must be removed from office immediately before he can do any more damage to this country and its institutions. This was not some quiet procedural maneuver or behind-the-scenes political maneuvering. This was a full-throated call for accountability delivered with the kind of passion and moral clarity that we rarely see from politicians anymore. And the reaction from both sides tells you everything you need to know about where we are as a country right now and how high the stakes have become. But here's what makes this moment different from every other impeachment push we've seen. This time, Green isn't alone. This time, he has the receipts. And this time, the evidence he's citing is so overwhelming that even some Republicans are starting to quietly admit they can't defend what Trump has done. Let me set the scene for you, because the context here matters enormously. And I want you to understand exactly what happened and why it is so significant. On December 14th, 2025, just days ago, Al Green took to the House floor during what was supposed to be routine business, and instead delivered a speech that will probably end up in the history books regardless of what happens next. He accused Trump of engaging in what he called daily nefarious conduct that is threatening the very foundations of American democracy. He talked about the Truth Social posts, where Trump has been making what Green characterized as threats against Democratic members of Congress and their families. He connected those threats to the broader pattern of political violence that has been escalating throughout Trump's presidency, and argued that the president is actively normalizing and encouraging attacks on his political opponents. And then he tied all of that to the unauthorized military strikes, the classified documents case, the obstruction of justice, the Epstein files delays, and basically every scandal that has been plaguing this administration for months. It was a comprehensive takedown delivered with righteous fury, and it clearly struck a nerve with everyone in that chamber. The immediate reaction from Republicans was predictable. They moved to table Green's resolution and kill it before it could go anywhere. And technically, they succeeded because the full House did vote to squash the impeachment effort as expected, given Republican control of the chamber. But here's the thing that everyone needs to understand about what happened. 140 House Democrats voted to advance Green's resolution before it was tabled. 140 members of Congress looked at the evidence and the arguments and decided that, yes, this president should face impeachment proceedings. That is not a fringe position, and that is not just a handful of progressive firebrands making noise for the cameras. That is a significant portion of one of the two major political parties in this country saying publicly and on the record that they believe Donald Trump has committed impeachable offenses and should be removed from power. The fact that the resolution was ultimately defeated does not change the significance of that vote or what it signals about where the Democratic Party is heading. And more importantly, it signals that the evidence has become so overwhelming that defending Trump is becoming politically toxic, even for Republicans in competitive districts. This is exactly the kind of moment you need to understand if you want to know where American politics is heading. If that matters to you, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what happens next. Because this situation is moving faster than any constitutional crisis in modern history, and the next chapter could drop at any moment. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, wait, didn't we already go through this impeachment thing twice before, and didn't it fail both times? And yes, that is technically true. But the situation now is fundamentally different from what we saw during Trump's first term. During the first two impeachment efforts, Trump was facing a Democratic House but a Republican Senate, which meant that even if he was impeached by the House, which he was twice, there was never any realistic chance of conviction and removal, because Senate Republicans were not going to vote against their own president, no matter what evidence was presented. But what Al Green is doing now is different, because he is building a record and establishing a framework for accountability that extends beyond the immediate political calculations. He is forcing members of Congress to go on the record about whether they support this president's conduct. And he is creating documentation that will be available for future legal proceedings and historical analysis, regardless of what happens in the current Congress. The specific charges that Green has been pushing are also worth examining in detail because they go far beyond the narrow issues that were at the center of the previous impeachment efforts. His resolution, House Resolution 537, specifically targets Trump's unauthorized military strikes, which Green argues were conducted without proper congressional authorization and in violation of the War Powers Act. But it doesn't stop there. Green is also citing the classified documents case where Trump's own voice on tape admits he cannot declassify materials while showing them to unauthorized civilians. He's citing the obstruction of justice proven by testimony from Trump's own IT administrator, who was ordered to delete security footage after a subpoena. He's citing the lawyer confessions where Trump's own attorneys admitted under oath that evidence was manipulated. This is not just about political disagreements or policy differences. This is about fundamental questions of constitutional governance and whether a president can wage war and threaten his opponents and obstruct investigations without any accountability whatsoever. Green is arguing that the answer must be no if we want to preserve anything resembling a functioning democracy. And the evidence he's presenting makes it very hard to argue otherwise, because it's not interpretation or spin. It's Trump's own voice. It's his own employees testifying. It's his own lawyers confessing. It's documentation that cannot be disputed. Let me take you deeper into what Al Green actually said during his floor speech, because the specific language he used is important and reveals a lot about the strategy behind this latest impeachment push. Green has been in Congress since 2005, and he has been one of the most persistent voices calling for Trump's removal, going all the way back to the first term. He introduced articles of impeachment multiple times before the Ukraine scandal and the January 6th insurrection, back when most Democrats were still reluctant to use the I word because they were worried about political backlash. Green has never been afraid to be out front on this issue, and his willingness to take political risks has earned him both admirers and critics within his own party. But what was different about this latest speech was the sense of urgency and the comprehensive nature of the indictment he laid out. This was not just about one scandal or one abuse of power. This was about a pattern of conduct that Green argued makes Trump unfit to hold office and dangerous to leave in power for even one more day. Green specifically called out Trump's use of Truth Social to make what he characterized as threats against Democratic members of Congress. And this is a point that deserves serious attention because it speaks to something genuinely alarming about where our political culture has gone under this president. Trump has always been aggressive on social media, and he has always attacked his opponents in harsh and personal terms. But what Green is alleging goes beyond normal political combat. He is saying that the president is actively encouraging violence against elected officials and creating an atmosphere where political violence becomes thinkable and even normalized. We have already seen the consequences of this kind of rhetoric. Multiple members of Congress have reported receiving death threats that specifically cite Trump's posts. Security details have been increased. Families have been targeted. This is not abstract political theory. This is real danger to real people. And Green is arguing that a president who uses his platform to stoke this kind of violence has forfeited his right to hold office and must be removed before someone else gets killed. Because, let's be clear, political violence has already escalated under this administration, and Trump's rhetoric is adding fuel to that fire. The connection to the military strikes is also crucial and represents a serious constitutional issue that extends beyond partisan politics. Trump ordered military strikes without obtaining congressional authorization as required by the Constitution and the War Powers Act. This is not a matter of interpretation or legal hair-splitting. The Constitution is very clear that Congress has the power to declare war, and that presidents cannot unilaterally commit American forces to armed conflict without legislative approval, except in cases of immediate self-defense. Trump's strikes did not meet that standard according to Green and many other legal experts, and they represent exactly the kind of executive overreach that the founders were trying to prevent when they wrote the Constitution. This channel exists to break down these complex constitutional issues so you understand what's really at stake. If you found this analysis valuable, hit that like button so more people see this kind of coverage. Because the mainstream media will move on to the next headline, but these questions about presidential power and accountability are fundamental to how our system works. I want to spend some time on the vote count, because I think it reveals something important about where the Democratic Party is right now and where it might be heading. 140 members voting to advance articles of impeachment is a significant number. It represents a majority of the Democratic caucus and includes members from across the ideological spectrum, from progressive firebrands to more moderate members who represent swing districts. This was not just the Squad and their allies making a symbolic gesture. This was a substantial portion of the party putting themselves on record in favor of impeachment despite the political risks involved. Some of these members represent districts that Trump won or that are highly competitive. And they are making a calculated bet that their constituents will reward them for taking a stand on accountability, rather than punishing them for appearing too partisan or too focused on attacking the president. That bet might pay off, or it might backfire spectacularly, but either way, it tells you that Democratic leadership is increasingly comfortable with impeachment as a political strategy. And more importantly, it tells you that the evidence has become strong enough that they believe they can win that argument with voters. The Republican response to Green's speech and the subsequent vote was predictable, but still worth examining because it reveals their strategy for dealing with these accountability efforts. They immediately moved to table the resolution, which is a procedural maneuver that allows them to kill a measure without having to debate it or vote on the substance. This lets Republican members avoid going on record about whether they actually support or oppose the specific charges against Trump. They can simply say they voted against a procedural motion rather than having to defend the president's conduct on the merits. It is a cowardly approach, but it is also politically smart because it denies Democrats the opportunity to force difficult votes and create campaign ads showing Republicans defending the indefensible. But here's the problem with that strategy. Every time they table these resolutions without addressing the substance, they look like they're running scared. They look like they know the evidence is damning, but they're choosing party loyalty over accountability. And in competitive districts where independent voters decide elections, that's a dangerous position to be in. Trump himself responded to the impeachment push by calling it loser desperation and claiming that Democrats are panicking because they know they are going to get destroyed in the midterms. That is standard Trump bluster. But you can tell from the intensity of his reaction that this is getting under his skin more than he wants to admit. He has been posting on Truth Social constantly about this, attacking Green personally, attacking Democrats broadly, and trying to rally his base against what he calls another witch hunt. But here's what's different this time. The witch hunt narrative is wearing thin because the evidence is too concrete. When you have Trump on tape admitting documents are classified while showing them to unauthorized people, that's not a witch hunt. That's a recording. When you have his own IT guy testifying under oath that he was ordered to delete footage after a subpoena, that's not a witch hunt. That's obstruction. When you have his own lawyers confessing to manipulating evidence, that's not a witch hunt. That's criminal conspiracy. Trump can scream about persecution all he wants, but the evidence speaks for itself. And voters are starting to notice. The timing of all this is absolutely critical and connects to everything else we have been covering on this channel. Green's floor speech came just days after the classified documents briefing, where members of Congress saw additional recordings of Trump admitting he knows he's violating the law. It came as the military strikes controversy continues to escalate with both parties, questioning the legal authority for those operations. It came amid the ongoing fallout from multiple scandals that have been piling up week after week. Green explicitly connected his impeachment push to these other scandals and argued that they all represent parts of a larger pattern of lawlessness and abuse that demands congressional action. He is not treating these as isolated incidents. He is treating them as evidence of a president who is fundamentally unfit for office and who poses an ongoing threat to the republic as long as he remains in power. And when you look at the full pattern, it's hard to argue with that assessment. We have a president who handles classified information recklessly. We have a president who orders military strikes without authorization. We have a president who obstructs investigations. We have a president who threatens his opponents. We have a president whose own staff and lawyers are testifying against him. That's not normal. That's not acceptable. And that's exactly what the impeachment power is designed to address. I also want to talk about Green's history with impeachment because it provides important context for understanding what he is trying to accomplish and why he keeps pushing even when the immediate political prospects seem dim. Green first introduced articles of impeachment against Trump back in 2017, long before Ukraine and long before January 6th, based on Trump's response to the Charlottesville rally and his general conduct in office. At the time, most Democrats thought he was being premature and reckless and potentially damaging to the party's electoral prospects. Nancy Pelosi and other party leaders tried to distance themselves from Green's efforts, and the resolutions went nowhere. But Green kept pushing and kept introducing new articles and kept making the case that Trump was dangerous and needed to be removed. And then Ukraine happened, and suddenly impeachment was mainstream Democratic policy. And then January 6th happened, and suddenly even some Republicans were voting to impeach. Green was ahead of his time, and he was right about the threat that Trump posed, even when his own party did not want to hear it. That history gives him credibility now, and explains why 140 of his colleagues were willing to follow his lead on this latest push. All right, so let us bring all of this together and talk about what it actually means and where things go from here, because we are in genuinely unprecedented territory, and the decisions that get made over the next few weeks could shape the trajectory of American politics for years to come. The first thing to understand is that Green has already announced he plans to file new articles of impeachment by Christmas, which means this fight is not going away anytime soon. Regardless of what happened with the tabling vote, he is committed to keeping the pressure on and forcing Republicans to repeatedly go on record defending Trump's conduct. Every time they table a resolution, they have to explain to their constituents why they are protecting a president who, according to Green and 140 of his colleagues, has committed serious crimes and abuses of power. That is not a comfortable position to be in, heading into an election year, and Green knows it. He is playing a longer game than the immediate vote count might suggest, and he is building a foundation for accountability that extends beyond the current Congress. And more importantly, he's creating a record that prosecutors can use once Trump leaves office. The connection to the special counsel evidence cannot be overstated because it fundamentally changes the context in which this impeachment debate is happening. Before we had the classified documents recordings, before we had the testimony about evidence destruction, before we had the lawyer confessions, Democrats could be accused of pursuing impeachment based on partisan animosity and political calculations rather than genuine evidence of wrongdoing. But now we have concrete proof. We have Trump's own voice. We have his own employees testifying. We have his own lawyers confessing. That is not a Democratic talking point. That is evidence that would hold up in any court in America. Green can now point to that evidence as independent confirmation of exactly what he has been saying for years, that Trump is a criminal who has abused his office and violated the law and must be held accountable. The combination of Green's political pressure and this overwhelming evidence creates a powerful dynamic that Republicans are going to have a very hard time countering with their usual dismissals about witch hunts and partisan persecution. Because you can't call it a witch hunt when Trump's own words prove guilt. The midterm election implications are also enormous, and both parties are clearly thinking about how this impeachment fight plays with voters. Republicans are betting that they can paint Democrats as obsessed with attacking Trump instead of focusing on the issues that voters care about, like the economy and immigration and public safety. They want to frame impeachment as a distraction and a sign of Democratic desperation. And they are hoping that swing voters will be turned off by what they characterize as partisan overreach. But Democrats are making a different bet. They are betting that voters are genuinely concerned about accountability and the rule of law, and that they will reward politicians who are willing to stand up and say that no one is above the law, including the president. Green's speech was designed to appeal to that sense of moral outrage and to mobilize Democratic voters who might otherwise be disengaged or demoralized. Whether that strategy works remains to be seen, but the 140 votes to advance his resolution suggests that Democratic leadership thinks it has a real chance of paying off. I want to address Trump's response because it tells you a lot about how seriously he is taking this threat despite his public bravado and dismissiveness. Calling the impeachment push-loser desperation is classic Trump, attacking his opponents rather than defending his conduct and trying to project confidence even when he is clearly rattled. But the intensity of his response and the frequency of his Truth Social post about it suggests that he is more worried than he wants to admit. Trump has always been obsessed with his image and with the narrative around his presidency. The idea of being impeached for a third time clearly gets under his skin. He was impeached twice during his first term, and both times he claimed vindication because the Senate did not convict. But being impeached 3 times would be a historic mark of shame that no amount of spin could erase. And Trump knows it. That is why he is lashing out so aggressively. And that is why his allies in Congress are working so hard to table these resolutions before they can generate too much attention and momentum. The broader pattern that Green identified in his speech is also worth dwelling on because it connects to everything we have been covering and reveals the true nature of this administration. We have a president who threatens his political opponents on social media. We have a president who launches unauthorized military strikes without congressional approval. We have a president who obstructs investigations and defies court orders. We have a president whose own staff is testifying against him and whose own lawyers are confessing to crimes. We have a president who is facing criminal prosecution while trying to govern. When you put all of these pieces together, and Green did put them together in his speech, you see an administration that is operating outside the bounds of constitutional governance, and that poses a genuine threat to the democratic institutions that are supposed to constrain executive power. That is not hyperbole, and that is not partisan exaggeration. That is a sober assessment of where we are as a country right now, based on documented evidence and sworn testimony. The question that everyone needs to be asking themselves is, what happens if impeachment fails again and Trump remains in office without any accountability for his conduct? Green is arguing that the consequences of inaction are worse than the political risks of action. And I think he has a point. Every time Congress fails to hold Trump accountable, it sends a message that presidents can do whatever they want as long as their party controls enough seats to block removal. That is a dangerous precedent that extends far beyond Trump, and that will shape how future presidents of both parties behave. If there are no consequences for obstruction and abuse of power, then every future president will feel empowered to push the boundaries even further. Green understands this, and that is why he keeps pushing, even when the immediate prospects for success seem dim. He is not just trying to remove this president. He is trying to establish a principle that will constrain all future presidents and preserve the constitutional system that makes democratic governance possible. So where does this leave us? And what should you be paying attention to over the coming days and weeks? First, watch for Green's Christmas filing because he has promised new articles of impeachment that incorporate the latest revelations and scandals. Those articles will lay out the specific charges and evidence that Democrats believe justify removal, and they will force another round of votes that put Republicans on record defending Trump's conduct. Second, watch how Republican senators respond because if even a handful start breaking ranks publicly, it could trigger a cascade that makes conviction actually possible. Third, watch the polls because both parties are going to be closely monitoring how voters respond to this impeachment push, and that will shape their strategies. And fourth, and most importantly, stay engaged because the politicians in Washington are watching to see how the public reacts, and they will adjust their positions based on what they think voters want. If you believe that accountability matters and that no one should be above the law, then now is the time to make your voice heard. The fight that Al Green started on the House floor is not going to end anytime soon, and the outcome is genuinely uncertain. Republicans have the votes to table resolutions and block formal impeachment proceedings, but they cannot stop the debate, and they cannot prevent the evidence from accumulating, and they cannot silence the growing chorus of voices demanding accountability. 140 members of Congress voted to advance articles of impeachment, and that number could grow as more revelations emerge and more scandals unfold. Trump is scared. You can see it in his posts and his attacks and his desperate attempts to change the subject. And he should be scared, because the walls are closing in from every direction. Green may not succeed in removing Trump from office through impeachment, but he is succeeding in something arguably more important. He is creating a record of this president's abuses that will be available for historians and prosecutors and future generations to examine. That record will outlast Trump's presidency, and it will shape how this era is remembered long after the current political battles are forgotten. If you want to stay ahead of how this unfolds, make sure you're subscribed and that notification bell is on so you get alerts the moment we post. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think 140 votes signals a turning point? Does the evidence justify removal? Well, let me know what you think. And if this breakdown helped you understand what's really happening on Capitol Hill, hit that like button. I'm Nathan Cross. This is American Daily News. And that's the situation.